Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about a Footstep sound effects component that I built for a personal project of mine. This component's going to handle everything from line tracing down underneath the player or character's foot and detecting the physical material and playing the corresponding sound, whether that's water, dirt, grass, you name it. And then it's going to also allow you to do some custom things like override that and play character specific sounds. Like for this guy, maybe some skeleton bone sounds. Versus if you had like a big rock golem, you might play some rock sounds. It's going to allow you to crossfade between walking and running sounds. It's going to also allow you to differentiate whether the character's just jumping maybe or doing a big jump off a cliff and landing heavy. So it's going to allow you to do all these custom things. And to get into it, I'm going to go over to my player character blueprint. Here I am in my player character blueprint. I've got the sound effects footsteps component selected, and here are my custom options. So under functionality, default physical surfaces. So that's basically just doing a line trace down, detecting the physical material, and playing the corresponding sound system, whether that's water sounds or dirt sounds or concrete, you name it. Aside from that, you can override all of those sounds and instead play a custom one-way sound. What that means is you could place a sound system in this walk column here, and it will play those for every notify it gets. So imagine you had a big rock golem, and you don't want to hear all those other sounds of the materials and all that. You just want to hear rock sounds as he's walking around. You could do this, plop it in there, and it'll automatically play those. Now, if you wanted to also have variation between walking and running, maybe lighter rock sounds versus heavier rock sounds, you can select custom two-way, and it will crossfade between your walk sound system and your run sound system. You can also select custom four-way and include jumping sounds and landing sounds. Jumping being like maybe a slight jump in place, versus if you're running off a cliff and you land and it's a bigger oomph. So you can set all those sounds here and just select the functionality there. You can also select dual functionality. When you do that, the default physical surface sounds are going to also play along with your custom system. So if you have dual functionality and custom one way, imagine a scenario where you're this guy. You might want to hear skeleton bone sounds that are specific to his enemy type, along with the materials he's walking on. Maybe he's chasing you off of a dirt road into some like puddles and stuff like that, and you wanna be able to hear that he's actually you're in water. You know what I mean? So this will allow you to do things like that. It will mix the physical material sounds along with the character specific sounds, and you can actually mix the volumes right here with the default volume multiplier, which will control how loud the material sounds are, the water and the dirt and the grass, and the custom sounds, which will control the character specific sound effects. Spawn detach will, if you have it selected, it will spawn the sound attached to the player's footstep socket. If it's unselected, it will spawn this sound at the line trace location. Max speed, you just put the character's max speed in there and it'll help it determine whether it's walking or running. And through that, it will find a point in these curves here and actually crossfade between the two sounds. So walking and running, you could put in custom float curves and have it crossfade. I got default ones here that I've selected that I think sound good. And you can actually have different ones for your custom sounds versus your default physical material sounds. Right now it's set up to use all the same ones, and it just crossfades based on the velocity of the character. And I'll get into all that in the blueprints shortly. So here I am in my animation notify blueprint for footstep related events. These are the variables I have. Footstep socket, so I know where to do a line trace down from. I have a jump or land boolean, and that's going to be set to true when the animation is either jumping in place maybe or falling and landing off a cliff. And then I have a sound effects, sound system reference where I can actually hear what I'm doing in the editor, because the problem with this kind of system is it's doing line traces down and it's detecting things in the world and playing corresponding sounds depending on all that. And in the animation editor, none of that exists. It doesn't know if you're walking on, grass or dirt, or it doesn't even have a reference to your character. So it's unable to do all these things. So it just doesn't play a sound. So this allows me to actually hear what I'm doing while I'm in the animation editor. But that sound there doesn't actually get sent or used in the game. It's just purely for lining things up perfectly, because it can be kind of hard to line up where it should go if you can't hear it, right? So this just helps you line up the sounds a little bit better with the animation, so you're not just guessing, right? And the way that looks is like this. I send in the socket, foot left, foot right, and so on. Here's the temporary audio file I want to use as a reference while editing. And no, we're not jumping or landing. He's running in this animation. So that's going to look like this. I could hear everything smoothly. And back to my animation notify blueprint. So as soon as this notify is called, it's going to hit this enable SFX in animation editor. So this is going to just check if it can get the player controller. If it can get the player controller, then we're not in the animation editor, we're in that game. So we're going to bypass this whole function. Okay. If it can't, then that means we're in the editor likely. So what's going to happen is it's going to play that corresponding sound effects that we set up. In this case, this concrete step. So this just kind of handles our editing inside the animation editor. But if we're in the game, this is skipped. Okay. From there, we're going to get the mesh component, get its owner, find that footstep component. Okay. And then we're going to call this function inside our footstep component. And we're going to send it the socket that we chose and whether or not we're jumping, landing, or walking, running. Okay. Now we're going to head into the component blueprint. So here's the function called from the animation notify blueprint that we just saw. We're going to take in our footstep socket that we attached and our jump land bool, and we're going to save those variables inside this blueprint. Okay. Then here we have a get actor info function. So when we open that, we're going to just get the owner, get its velocity, set it there. We're going to get the vector length, and we're going to send that out as the speed. And then we're going to get the skeletal mesh component and return that as well. So this is just going to get stats and information on the actor that we can access whenever we need throughout this blueprint. So we're going to take the mesh. Okay, we're going to get its socket that we chose from the notify, and we're going to do a line trace down about 50 units in the z-axis. If we hit something, we're going to store the location that we hit along with the physical material that we hit. Okay, don't worry about this. This is a debug function from a blueprint function library I have. Right now it's not set to do anything, but it's useful to see, for example, what physical material we're stepping on or location or whatever information you want. And once this is all done, it's going to call the trigger footsteps sound effects function. Inside my trigger footsteps sound effects function, I have a bunch of getters I'm utilizing that we should talk about first. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the footsteps sound effects function. And this is a way for me to organize all the different sounds for the materials and whether or not you're walking, jumping. And the way I organize things is light sounds versus heavy sounds. Light being whether if you're walking or jumping, and the opposite of that, heavy, being running or landing off a big cliff. Okay, so keep that in mind, light versus heavy. From there, I separate it further between walking and jumping, and all I'm doing is taking the physical material that we hit from the line trace, getting the surface types, and I could set different sounds for different materials. Okay, so different sound systems for walking, for jumping, and then the same thing for running and landing. And then those get sent into the select node, and then it's going to take that bool from the animation notify on whether we're jumping or landing. So if the animation is a jump, it's going to use these jump or land sounds versus these walk or run sounds if it's just a normal animation. Okay, and then those get passed forward. Now this is custom functionality. So here we have our light sounds on top, the walking, jumping, and then the heavy sounds on the bottom, the running and the landing. And if we have the default functionality set, it's just going to take in the sound systems from over here and pass those through, okay? But if you have, for example, custom one-way selected, that means that we just want to hear the one sound for walking, running, jumping, no matter what, okay? That's set over here. Walk, run, jump, land. Those are those variables that we saw here, okay? So if you had that golem and you just want to hear one rock sound system for all the different notify events, you would use that. And then it's going to feed walk in for the light. And for the heavy, it's also going to feed walk in because we're not differentiating between walk and run. But if you had it set to two-way, for the light sounds, you're still going to get that walk. But for the heavy sounds, you're now getting a run that it can crossfade between, okay? If you have custom four-way selected, you now need to differentiate between whether or not you're jumping and landing or versus walking and running. So we have that jump land bool from the animation notify, and we're just got to feed that into a select node, and then that goes into the custom four-way. Same thing for the heavy sounds. From there, we're going to see if dual functionality is set to true. If it is, we're going to pass through the default sounds to our walk and to our run. And then we're going to pass the custom switch. If you have it set to two-way or one-way, we're going to pass those to our custom sounds, okay? If dual functionality is turned off, then walk and run is just going to get overridden with those custom sounds. So they'll essentially be the same, okay? But if you have them set to both, you'll have access to all the different sounds there. Next, I'll head into the get footstep volumes function. So inside this function, we have our default sounds up top, the physical material sounds, and then we have our custom sounds being taken care of down here. So the first thing we're doing is we're getting the speed from the character, which is the vector length from the velocity, and we're normalizing that to a range of 0 up to the max speed that we set in the component, okay? Now from there, we're clamping that range from 0 to 1, and we're going to return a value in between 0.3 and 1. So we don't want nothing lower than 0.3. We want that to be our minimum. And then that is what we're going to send to our float curves in order to get a volume back. So let's just take a look at our float curves. If I open up the walk curve, if we send in a value of 0.3, we're going to get 0.33 back. And this is going to increase. And then as we start to get a higher value, that means we're running. So we're going to transition into a running sound. So that's when this walk curve starts to get quieter. And then if we open up the run curve, we'll see that it gets higher at this point. Run curve. So we don't want to hear this sound when we're at 0.3, right? We want it to just start to come in and then get higher up as we're closer to 1. So that's going to set the volumes for our sounds. And then those values are sent to this macro, which just allows me to apply custom volume multiplier to them. That's what we see over here. That's what allows us to basically mix between the default sound and the custom sound and all that. So because the top ones are default, we're just sending that in and we're getting the default back, and the bottom ones we're getting the custom volume back. And then that returns out into this. It basically looks like this on the other end. And we have access to all the different volumes depending on how fast we're moving and how hard we're landing. So it's going to take all that into account and just kind of feed us a volume so we don't have to do all this stuff on the other end. So now I'm in the trigger footstep sound effects function, and because we did all that volume math and figuring out which sound effect systems to play in separate functions, it's going to make this look a little bit neater. So off the bat, all we do is we determine whether we're spawning the sounds attached to the player or not. So it's pretty much almost the same thing, but let's just assume we're spawning attached. We have the light sounds here and the heavy sounds here. And those float curves are going to automatically crossfade between each other. So all we need to do is supply the volume values that we set from this function. So what's going to happen is we have a spawn sound attached node. We're going to spawn the walk jump sound that we're using, the light sound, and then the heavy sound for the running or landing. Okay. For attached to component, we're just going to attach it to the mesh and at the socket that we specified in the animation notify, and we just plug in the volume. And then we do the same thing over here. And then if it's not dual functionality, we're done. If it is dual functionality, we're going to go ahead and also do the custom sounds. Okay, so it's the same thing, but now we're just attaching the custom walk sound and the custom run land sound. Okay, and the only difference down here is instead of spawning attached, we're just going to play a sound at location, and we're going to specify the footstep location from the line trace. And then everything else is the same. And that is that. So now maybe I'll show you it in action. So inside my player character blueprint, the functionality is currently set to default physical surfaces, and the default volume multiplier is set to 0. And that's because I don't want to hear any player-related footstep sounds for this demonstration. I want to focus in purely on this guy's footsteps. So that component is on my base AI enemy class, and all my enemies inherit from that. They're children of it. So they all inherit that component automatically. So right out of the gate, as I create a new enemy, it has the ability to detect this physical material on the ground and play the corresponding footstep sounds. And then I could go in later or whenever I want and add in custom sounds, blend the two, and get a little bit creative right from the component here. So it offers a quick way to just easily have sound set up right away and then go in later and customize things. So for this guy's component, he's currently set to default physical surfaces. So he will play whatever material he's walking on. So the ground right now doesn't have a physical material. So automatically he will just play the default sound setting inside the component, which at the moment is concrete. So let's check that out. And there's our concrete sounds. Now, if you were to start walking on water, you would hear water sounds instead. Just for the demonstration, let's take the ground and set the physical material to water and watch this change take place. Now we hear water. Okay, let's say we didn't want that though. Let's say we want our own custom enemy sound specific to this enemy type. Well, we can go in, we can override the physical material sounds by selecting custom one way, and now it will use the sound that's in here. So we got a skeleton footsteps sound effects system. We've plugged that in. Now whenever he walks, we'll hear that sound no matter what physical material he's walking on. So we will no longer hear water, we'll hear his own custom sounds. Awesome. Let's say you wanted to hear both. Say he chases you around, you're running off a path, and now you're in light water or some puddles maybe, and he's chasing you into them, and you wanna hear that reaction in the sound as well. You want to hear that he's just followed you into some puddles of water, along with his own character-specific sounds. You could come into his component, leave it at custom one way. What you would do is select dual functionality. That's all you got to do. Now you hear the water and you hear his custom sounds. Let's test that out. So now you have custom sounds along with the reaction to the environment, okay? You can also mix those sounds. Let's say you want to hear more water and less skeleton sounds. Okay, so you can mix those values pretty nicely right from the blueprint component. Spawn attached. So when this is set to false, it's just going to spawn the sounds at the line trace. So you should see the audio components spawning in behind when I have this visualization command plugged in. Let me do that right now. So we're going to set that to true, and now we should be able to visualize the audio. So when he's running, you'll see those audio components spawning in behind him as he moves from the location that the line trace took place at. And there we see the footstep sounds following behind him. If we choose spawn attached, they will spawn attached to the footstep socket, and they will follow him in the real world. Let's take a look at that. As you can see, they're attached and follow him. Yeah. And that's pretty much that. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and let me know what you think.